Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It is Tuesday, June 30th, 2015, last day of the month, coming up on the 4th of July weekend. CNN's already going ballistic, saying there are terror attacks coming. The terrorists may be coming to get you. So, all of which, of course, is going to seriously impact all those commercial establishments that look to the 4th of July weekend as a time when they're going to do some business. Barbecue supply places, the supermarkets, the liquor stores, the fireworks stands for those few places where people are still allowed to buy something that's a little more potent than a party popper. If they know there's a terror attack coming, shouldn't they go out and stop it? And if there is a terror attack, it means that once again, the CIA, FBI, DHS, NSA can't do the job that they claim they can do, the reason for us to surrender our Bill of Rights. So we ought to just scrap all of them, turn those buildings into public housing for the poor, and go back to the Bill of Rights. All right. Phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Obviously, the big news, Chris Christie has stepped into the ring for next year's presidential election. I think he's number 14 or something. They got enough GOP presidential candidates to field a football team. Wow, maybe we should pick the president that way. Big football game, everybody shows up, and winning team, the captain of the winning team gets to be the president. Could hardly do any worse than we have right now on that. Now, as you heard, there is word coming out of Athens at the last second that a deal is not forthcoming. There have been a lot of, shall I put this delicately, highly speculative headlines all morning long. Everybody is really wanting this to work out. The final official deadline at which point Greece will be in default is 6 p.m. Washington, D.C. time, just about the moment this show is ending. And it doesn't look like anything's going to happen. The wolves are getting ready to pounce all over Greece. The hedge fund managers are in absolute panic. They're over at their local religious institution praying for a miracle. Please, imaginary playmate in the sky, shower Greece with euros to repay their debts. And everybody's just really kind of scared. Now, Greece is still trying to negotiate with the Troika, with the ECB, the IMF, the money junkies. They're still trying to come to a deal. The money junkies' deal is you will come back and be our slaves. Period, end of discussion, because they can't cut Greece any slack without getting an immediate demand for exactly the same from France and Italy and Spain and all these other countries that they have crushed down into abject poverty and hopelessly unpayable debt. So Greece asked for a 2-year bailout plan from the ESM. Merkel shot it down and put out a statement that Greece has to cancel the upcoming referendum on independence or there will be no deals whatsoever. Reuters actually ran a headline saying that Greece is willing to call off the referendum in exchange for a loan deal, but I could find no support for it, not even in the article linked to that headline. And I think this is somebody's wishful thinking, getting the better of them, because nobody wants this to happen, but it doesn't seem like there's going to be any way to stop it. Somebody actually launched a crowdfunding campaign to bail out Greece. Obviously didn't raise anywhere near the money that they need, and here's why. There isn't enough money in existence on planet Earth to pay off all the debt created by the private central banks. Because when you are forced to be dependent on a currency loaned into circulation by a privately owned central bank at interest, the size of the debt is always larger than the total available money supply. It's designed that way to keep us all, whether we're nations or individuals, slaves to debt. That's the essence of the banking industry right there. Now, Europe is already talking about capital controls across borders. As the Eurozone starts to come apart at the seams, next it'll be border controls, which undermines the whole point of the European Union, that it was all one giant place and people and money could just travel wherever they wanted. Well, all of a sudden, they're having to go back and say, we need the safety barriers back up. And if they go back to having border and capital controls, what's the point of having a European Union? It's just another parasitical bureaucracy over your national governments and a parasitical European central bank sitting on top of your national central banks. They're layering the predators on top of us. And a lot of people are basically saying what Europe is in the middle of right now is they're attacking Greek democracy. And that is a significant issue. Because historically, traditionally, we all view Greece as the cradle of democracy. The nation where the idea of a people deciding for themselves how to run their country originated. And the people of Greece decided they didn't want to be victims for the Brussels money junkies any longer, and Europe's trying to come back in and say, yes, you will. You will be our slaves no matter what. We don't care what you, the Greek people, want. And the Greek people are rankling at that idea that they have lost control. All right, getting back to the economy then. The people of Greece are absolutely on board with this idea of ending their slavery to the money junkies, and they're holding huge rallies in support of Syriza in Athens. And if this referendum goes forward, there is absolutely no question that they will overwhelmingly vote to leave the European Union and to simply repudiate the odious debt. And Europe's trying to find some way they can beg, bribe, blackmail, corrupt Tsipras into saying, all right, we'll go back to doing things the old way. And the Greek people don't want it. And that's why this is beginning to be seen as an attack by the bankers on Greece's democracy, and let's be honest, the democracy of the entire world. Money junkie banks do not like democratic processes. They don't like the people to have a vote, because then those people can vote themselves free of those banks. All they need is a legislature they can bribe, because that's what happened here in the United States of America a little over 100 years ago. A corrupted Congress and a corrupted president sold us into the slavery of the private central bank model, the same predatory bank system we fought a revolution to be free of. And that's exactly what happened. Banks do not like democracy. Banks love fascism. Banks are the essence of fascism. Now, back on the 12th of this month, Deutsche Bank CEOs were basically shown the door. The public statement was they had just decided to retire mere months after coming on board with the bank. The problem is that Deutsche Bank is the world's largest holder of derivatives right now. They've been buying derivatives like crazy against Greece's debt, Europe's debt, everything. They think they're a great deal. Deutsche Bank has literally been betting there's going to be some kind of a crash. The problem is getting the money from those derivatives, and that is the real problem, because, and this was something we suggested was going to happen, and obviously I'm going to keep on talking through the commercial while we try and figure out what happened at GCM. The committee in New York that decides when a default has happened and triggers the credit default swaps to be paid has declared by imperial edict, and away from all public accountability, that Greece sort of is voluntarily refusing to pay, therefore it's not really a default, and that means that everybody who bought a credit default swap against Greece's debt is holding a worthless piece of paper, courtesy of the money junkie financial institutions. They've reneged on the deal. They've broken the promise, and they're going to wrap it in all kinds of justification about, well, what is the real meaning of default? And I think for the people holding those credit default swaps, the default is when you don't get your money from the person you've loaned it to on time. And what we're seeing from Wall Street is it's not a default because we fully expect that Greece will pay off this debt somewhere eventually down the road, maybe next century, and therefore we don't have to make good on all the credit default swaps. And it's crooked as all heck. I understand why they did it. They simply don't have the money. Because credit default swaps, in fact, all derivatives, they are not regulated. And these financial institutions can sell them as many as they want without maintaining the cash reserves to make good on the claims coming in. That's just it. Now, we're hearing from the Federal Reserve, actually from the ex-Fed Governor Lindsay, that Janet Yellen is going to use what's going on in Greece as her justification to not raise Federal Reserve rates any longer. And let's see. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can make a connection. Okay, there we are. Still not working. So Yellen is going to keep the Fed rates pretty much at zero. They're cranking out all that almost zero interest money, pouring it all over Wall Street so they can buy up stocks as fast as people are selling them. And the market did end just slightly in the green. At one point, it was like 100 points up, but it closed at plus 23. But when Greece defaults officially tonight, it's going to get really kind of ugly. Now, everyone's been focusing on Greece, but that's not the real problem here in the United States of America. Yes, the United States financial system has a huge exposure in Greece, but the real problem closer to home is down in Puerto Rico and in a lot of the debt-stricken cities that are on the edge of collapse and for which Wall Street sold credit default swaps. And it looks like the Chicago public school system is in trouble making their payment that was due today. Bond investors and taxpayers alike are in a panic over that. Puerto Rico, Illinois, New Jersey, Chicago. There are a lot of places on the edge of default. The people who loaned that money are going to be losing it, and the companies that sold those derivatives, they can't just go on saying it's not really default, we're not going to make good without collapsing the entire derivatives market. There really is no way out of this other than for Congress to stand up, man up or woman up, as the case may be, and say it's time to rescind the charter of the Federal Reserve Bank and take back management of the economy by we the people, because that's how the nation started, and it worked. It absolutely worked. Now, bond insurers in the United States are already in serious trouble as Puerto Rico's bond market collapses. And again, it's just cascading all over the place. There's a fund manager out there who's, this is being reported over on silverdoctors.com, saying that the Puerto Rico default may trigger a black swan derivatives meltdown. Because the sellers of those derivatives can't go on hiding behind this committee that says it's not really a default, it's not really a default, it's not really a default. There's a crash coming. The question is it a crash in the companies that sold the derivatives? Or is it a crash in the derivatives market itself as people lose all confidence in them and start dumping that worthless paper to anybody silly enough to still buy it? And there's a lot of small firms out there that aren't large enough to get headlines or special government protection. They're going to be hammered by all of this. Now, Puerto Rico is effectively bankrupt. They're hovering at the edge of default. The governor of Puerto Rico has asked the U.S. government for help. The U.S. federal government is refusing to bail out Puerto Rico. They don't have the money to do it, because they still got to send it all over to Israel to keep Israel happy. But Obama promised he was going to send advisors to Puerto Rico, just like he did to Detroit. And look how well that worked out for the people of Detroit. Over in Africa, we're getting a report that the IMF and the U.S. government are set to ruin Ghana. And Ghana is in many ways just like Libya was. Before the U.S. got in tinkering, they had one of the most reliable electrical infrastructures in all of Africa. Highest percentage of households connected to the grid. And now all of a sudden the IMF came in, loaned them money, and insisted that their infrastructure, the Volta River Authority, be broken up and privatized. And now it's unreliable. It's all driven by money, and they leave disaster in their wake. Here's a little homework assignment for all of you. Go out to Google and look for images of Iraq before the U.S. invasion and after the U.S. conquest. Same thing with Libya. Look at Libya before the U.S. went in to kill Gaddafi and afterwards. Same thing in Yemen before the intervention a few years ago. Everywhere the U.S. and the money junkies intervene, overthrow a government and take control of the country, it is tragedy for the people who live there. Now, there's an article on the front page of whatreallyhappened.com, 16 facts about the tremendous financial devastation that we're seeing all over the world. And they're talking about all of these problems that are looming. Ukraine is probably going to default sometime in the next 3 weeks. We're looking at a huge, unstoppable tsunami of fiscal damage. They've been holding it back with duct tape and little Dutch boys with their finger in the dam. And that was never going to work very long because nobody has the courage to stand up and deal with the actual root cause of all this devastation, which is private central banking that by design creates more debt than money with which to pay the debt until the debt crashes the system. And we're there. The people who set up this whole thing, they went to their graves happy after lifetimes of wealth and comfort and luxury and privilege. And they knew that somebody else down the road was going to have to deal with the mess, but it's not their problem. They got what they wanted when they wanted to get it. And that is always a problem with the political and the financial class. They just want what they want right then. And they don't care if somebody else has to pay a price for it down the road. That's just good business sense, as it were. Okay, let's see. Leaked NSA document. We were talking about this, how the government of France is very upset over revelations that the NSA was spying not just on 3 former French presidents, but on their entire economic system. They were stealing business secrets, economic data, to shift the advantage to American companies who are good buddies with the NSA and the U.S. political system. And what was revealed by a lot of this information that was put out by WikiLeaks is the French government is acknowledging their economy is in dire straits. It's worse than anybody can imagine. They're keeping it concealed from the rest of the world, just like the U.S. government is keeping the true scale of our unemployment from the rest of the world. Everybody is in trouble because of this private central banking model, and the governments are trying to put a positive face on it. They're basically bluffing their people and each other to go on saying, this is working, this is working, this is working. And it isn't working any longer. And there's talk in France of also leaving the European Union. The leading contender for the French presidency in the upcoming elections is running on a platform of leaving the European Union. There's a massive petition drive in Austria to leave the European Union. The globalist vision of one world underneath one global reserve bank is starting to come apart at the seams. Sadly and tragically, their plans are coming apart. Sadly and tragically, as they fail to get what they want through negotiation and bribes and money, they unleash war. And that's where we are right now. The private central bank is what drives the nation to global wars. Crash of 2007, World War I. Crash of 1907, World War I. 1929, World War II. Crash of 2008, and here we are. Just stop and remember and share with all your friends. Before the creation of the Federal Reserve, there was no such thing as a world war. It's an inevitable outcome of this predatory system of banking. And it's going to come crashing down. And we, the people of planet Earth, have to be adamant and united that we will not let this monstrosity, this cancer, take root in human civilization ever again. Now, Brazil has issued their support for setting a common BRICS currency. All these nations are signing on to BRICS, and they're trading their currencies directly with each other without going through the U.S. dollar. Now they're proposing the idea of a common currency for all the BRICS nations. This is going to be even more attractive internationally than currencies from the individual BRICS nations, certainly far more attractive than the U.S. dollar, and this is Wall Street and the Federal Reserve's worst nightmare. They're seeing the emergence of the global currency they all dreamed of, but it's not under their control. They can't manipulate it. They can't profit from it. They're in serious, serious trouble with that. Okay. Iceland has continued handing their crooked, corrupt bankers prison sentences. They're getting prison sentences 4 years long. And that is appropriate for the crime the bankers did. The directors of these banks that cheated the people of Iceland got on board this whole 2008 mortgage-backed security fraud, signed on with Wall Street and said, yes, we'll bubble it up, we'll all be rich, they'll be poor, but hey, that's the only way we can feel rich is if we look out our windows of our glass towers and see them struggling and starving in the streets. That's the only way we can feel truly rich. And Iceland wrote off the debt created through fraud and is throwing their crooked bankers in jail, and that's why Iceland's economy has recovered from 2008 faster than pretty much anybody else, which is why you don't hear about Iceland much in the American corporate media. Don't want to give you slaves' uppity ideas about actually holding the money junkies to account for their crimes. It's gotten so bad, they're openly admitting to the fraud, saying, it's just how we do business. It's what we do. If you're going to deal with Wall Street, there's going to be fraud and corruption. It's how we keep the system going. Remember last February, there was a file leak regarding the HSBC bank scandal that was allowing 6,200 Israelis with wealth totaling $10 billion to escape taxation. It's what they do. They set up a bunch of rules, and then they sell people permission to break the rules. It's not unlike the Catholic Church with the indulgences. Remember, I keep telling you, banking is not a science. It's a religion. It's a bunch of arbitrary beliefs that you're encouraged to believe in that benefit the clergy, the money junkies. And then, having built this entire faith-based economic structure, they're selling indulgences. If you'll give me a little money, I'll let you evade the taxes and the rules. Article out of activistpost.com. Big money pump and dump as a way of life. And it's reinforcing the idea that right now, with our manufacturing in decline, the dollar in decline, nobody wants our GMO agriculture. Wall Street is surviving on fraud and corruption. And a big part of why they're able to do that is because that Federal Reserve has a license to counterfeit U.S. money. Just create it out of thin air and pump it into the system to help their buddies on Wall Street. It's not helping you. When they print up another $1 trillion worth of instant money or type it into a computer, the money you already have, the money you traded your labor for, loses value. It's like the Federal Reserve is being run by Lord Voldemort, and he waves his wand, and wealth vanishes magically from your pocket and appears magically in the pockets of the Wall Street money junkies. That's exactly what's going on. It's a perfect metaphor. I've gotten emails from people saying, so what if the Federal Reserve creates another $1 trillion and gives it to Wall Street? It doesn't affect me. Yes, it does. That's the reason you are seeing food prices and fuel prices going up, skyrocketing through the roof. Fuel and food are where inflation show up first, and it is a reminder of the government's deceptiveness that the official calculation of the rate of inflation does not include rising food prices or fuel prices. They don't want those numbers in there. It's going to make the numbers look bad, and we're going into an election year. Got to have only good, happy numbers. Support the incumbency. Only those double plus good facts, and they may not even be facts, but that's what we're going to tell the people because we want them to go on supporting us. And they're just making it up as they go along. All righty, another article over on paulcraigroberts.org. And I really admire him, and he really knows what he's talking about. We've had him on the show. I'm going to get him back on the show again. And the headline of his story says it outright. Capitalism has devolved into looting. And he starts his article with this wonderful quote from Atlas Shrugged. When you see that men get richer by graft and by pull than by work, and your laws don't protect you against them, but protect them against you. When you see corruption being rewarded and honesty becoming a self-sacrifice, you may know that your society is doomed. And that's absolutely true. They did a movie of Atlas Shrugged last year. I still haven't seen it come on to cable. I wonder if there was something in there the government didn't like. By the way, the top 4 employment sectors in the United States are paying $10 an hour or less. The largest body of American workers are hovering near minimum wage. The middle class effectively has vanished. And that's intentional. Every tyranny in history destroys the middle class because it is from the middle class that resistance to oligarchy arises. The Soviet Union lasted as long as it did because it designed the middle class out from the very, very beginning. It was a system where there was the proletariat, the vast working body, who were kept in poverty, and the elites, and there was nothing in between. Another article out of opednews.com, the American worker crushed again by the overwhelming power of corporatism. And basically it's talking about the fact that the desire for profits has taken over corporate leadership, and they're looking for the cheapest possible way they can make their products. They're offshoring. It's going to be accelerated by the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, and here's the problem. If all of America's workers are out of work and not able to trade their labor for reasonable wages and salaries, who's going to go into the shopping malls to buy all these products? This offshoring was a very short-sighted idea. It generated a lot of profits very quickly, while killing the American goose that lays the American golden egg for all of the consumer economy. Everyone's getting all up hot and bothered about robots in the shopping malls. We're going to have robots. We don't have to have those smelly, troublesome humans working in the stores. We'll have robots. And the end result of that is you're going to have brand new, shiny, clean shopping malls full of all kinds of wonderful goods and staffed by robots standing around with absolutely nothing to do because nobody will have the money to come in there and buy anything. That's the problem. The biggest failure of our entire culture is a leadership that refuses to think long term, refuses to see the wide view. They're focused narrowly on what gets them what they want, and their thinking stops with the next stockholders report or the next election. And that's it. That's it. Whatever's going to happen next year, next 5 years, next 10 years, they're oblivious. They don't care. Their goal is to retire and not have to deal with that. And that is a big part of why we're in the mess that we're in. Now, I know that you are like me. You want to support the American worker. And I'll look for that Made in the USA label. But it turns out there is a problem. Because it turns out over at theconsumerist.com, there was a study done that found more than 100 products labeled Made in the USA at Walmart's website that were actually made somewhere else. Now, technically, this is false advertising, but apparently it's a big trend. The large retail corporations understand we, the American people, want to support our fellow American worker. We're looking for that Made in USA label. So what do? Do they hire more American workers? No, they just print up new labels. And then they generously donate to their favorite Congress critter to have the regulatory agencies look someplace else. That's how bad the corruption has spread in our country. Now, as you probably have already heard, Obama has now signed that fast-track authorization and is now moving forward trying to implement these Trans-Pacific Pact, Transatlantic Trade and Investment Pact. More and more is coming out about what's in there. One of the most onerous provisions of the Trans-Pacific Partnership is the fact that pharmacies will be banned from selling generic medications. Now, if you're not sure what I mean, this is how it is. If a big pharmaceutical company comes up with a new patented medication, they'll sell it through the pharmacies, and there's a huge markup because they're making back the money that, in theory, they put into research and development to make sure it was going to be safe and effective. And then when the patent expires, other companies can manufacture that same medication as a generic. They can't use the trade name, but they'll use its chemical name. And that's why when you go to the pharmacy, if you say, I want the generic of this, you will get the same medication, but at a much lower cost. Under one of the provisions that is currently in the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, U.S. pharmacies will not be allowed to sell generic medications anymore. They will only be selling the patented, much more expensive medications. And what's going to happen then is, especially because Obamacare made healthcare in general much more expensive, we already have doctors and medical clinics that are in financial trouble because people don't even want to go in there anymore because they can't afford it. They're staying at home and praying the imaginary playmate in the sky will heal them, or they're finding natural cures, home cures that they can make themselves. They can't afford to go to the clinics, and they can't afford to buy the medications, and the whole medical industrial complex is going to collapse. That's why they're now saying the government will order you to buy medications, like they just did in California. Governor Brown signed that mandatory vaccine bill, where you will get these vaccines for your child. You will pay the money for them. And the goal is to keep your money flowing into the medical corporations. It's got nothing to do with the health and safety of your children. We've reached the stage in our descent into fascism where the government orders you to go out and buy things, whether you need them or not, whether you've got the money for them or not. I'm sure there's a bank somewhere that'll loan you the money for all these mandated medications at reasonably generous interest rates. And that's where we are. Now, in response to the Tunisian beach massacre, which has all the hallmarks of a false flag now, Prime Minister David Cameron is threatening Royal Air Force bombing raids against the Islamic State in Syria, meaning he's going to go in and start bombing Syrian infrastructure. Because the real goal isn't getting ISIS. ISIS is a made-up enemy to hide the fact that the U.S. and Great Britain are declaring war on Syria. They want Assad out. They've been trying to get him for 4 years. And Prime Minister Cameron is saying that obviously in the wake of the Tunisian beach massacre, military solutions are now warranted. So the purpose of this Tunisia false flag was to justify the escalation of the conquest of Syria and the breakup of Iraq. Oh, we've got to get ISIS. The ISIS is the bad guy. We're not really making war on Syria or Iraq. We have to get ISIS. And here is where Vladimir Putin has stepped in and proved once again what an amazing statesman that he is. He made out there and said, nations must unite to fight the Islamic State, to fight ISIS. And in order to join the fight against ISIS, Russia is now providing military support for Syria's President Assad. It is a brilliant move because the U.S. has made this propaganda villain out of ISIS. And they very well can't step back and say, no, Russia, you can't come in and help Assad against ISIS. They got caught in their own propaganda, hoisted with their own petard. The president is now boarding petard 1. The U.S. is now admitting that they are paying terrorists in Syria for what is politely termed services rendered, killing the Syrian people, false flag chemical weapons attack, and so forth. But, of course, they can't come up with any money for the people of Detroit to get water again, but they got plenty of your money. They can hire Al-Qaeda to go in and get that gosh darned Assad because he won't run his country for the benefit of American financial interests. Now, in response to reports that Turkey is going to invade Syria in order to fight the Kurds, ISIS, or somebody that is being labeled as ISIS, are starting to mine the Syrian-Turkey border to sort of form an impediment for yet another player entering into that particularly overcrowded arena, as it were. Now, interesting story over at craigmurray.org. Craig Murray is out there saying that the official line of a lone gunman in Tunisia is a lie. And I'm in agreement because when it first happened, and they said that this guy had just wiped out something like 30 people in 20 seconds. That's more than 1 a second. For a lone gunman, I'm sorry, I'm not buying that. And there are reports that there were other gunmen present, but of course we're not going to talk about them because they're pushing the lone wolf terrorist that can't be found with NSA and CIA and FBI. Because that's what they're going to claim. If there's a false flag attack this weekend, they're going to claim, oh, it was a lone wolf. That's why we couldn't find him. And that's why we have to spy on all of you all the time, because any one of you can turn into a lone wolf. The full moon comes out, and the fur grows, and the fangs pop out, and you become a lone werewolf terrorist. And that's the next story they're going to give us. It's amazing. Now, Egypt, over in Egypt, their president, General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, the new U.S. puppet ruler that was put in after Morsi was kicked out, after the people of Egypt kicked out the last U.S. puppet ruler, Mubarak, is changing the laws to allow speedy executions for everybody still associated with the previous government, meaning Morsi. They're putting in an express lane. 3 crimes or less, you go to the head of the line and the firing squad or whatever it is they're doing over there in Egypt. Basically, it's a purge, wrapped in the mantle of some kind of legal process. But it's a purge. They're purging out all the supporters and representatives of the government that kicked out the last U.S. puppet. Now they've got a new U.S. puppet. And life for the Egyptian people is, not surprisingly, in terrible, terrible, terrible shape. Speaking of making life worse for everybody where the U.S. is in, the U.S. is now going to resume sending weapons to Bahrain. This is a bit awkward for the U.S. government because the government of Bahrain is dealing with a very unhappy civil population that want their U.S. puppet kicked out. And in order to keep their U.S. puppet in place in Bahrain, the U.S. is giving that puppet military weapons to use on their own population. Now, turning to Iran, things are heating up over there. France's Fabius is out there saying that there are 3 conditions that must be met for the Iran deal, and they're probably not going to be met. France is saying they will not go along with the deal unless there are these 3 last-second additions, okay? That there must always be limitations on Iran's research and development capacity. They're not allowed to have too much university labs working on their nuclear infrastructure. It's basically saying you will be dumber than we are. We can't feel superior unless we mandate that you are less well-educated than we are. Here's the real sticking point. France is out there doing the bidding of Netanyahu and demanding rigorous inspection of all Iranian military sites, including non-nuclear sites. And France is saying that there has to be a mechanism where the sanctions will return instantaneously and automatically at the first hint that Iran is violating the conditions of the deal. Now, first of all, Iran has never agreed to inspections of non-nuclear sites, even though the propagandists have been claiming they did so in the original framework deal. Non-nuclear military sites are irrelevant in the context of this being a deal about nuclear weapons. What France is demanding on behalf of Israel and the U.S. is a license to spy on everything Iran is doing militarily. And the threat that sanctions can be returned in an instant is a non-starter for Iran because of all the times Israel has come up with claims that Iran is doing this and Iran is doing that, and there's never any proof. But if Israel has the key to resume the sanctions whenever they want, they can do it to punish the Iranian people. Or for that matter, a crooked stockbroker, somebody who's bought, he's short-selling Iranian stocks, and then he can throw a friend in the car, oh, Iran is doing this, and they shouldn't, oh, the sanctions are back in place, the Iranian stock market crashes, and the stockbroker makes a killing overnight. It's wide open for corruption and profiteering and bad use to have that in there. Now, everybody understands what France is doing. They're trying to put new stumbling blocks in front of a deal to get it out there. And there's an article over in Catbird Seats saying these are deliberate stumbling blocks. These are deliberate stumbling blocks to try and kill this deal because Israel doesn't want a deal. The U.S. doesn't really want a deal. They want to open the door for a war against Iran. Remember, all the way back in 2008, General Wesley Clark, actually it was 2005, General Wesley Clark blew the whistle that the U.S. government had an agenda of conquering all of the resource-rich areas of the world and shackling them to the dollar. And the plan called for all of the Middle Eastern oil nations to be conquered, ending with Iran in 2008. That's what they want. They want an excuse to make war on Iran. Israel's already out there saying that if the deal is signed, they reserve the right, if they actually have one, to go on out and bomb Iran's civilian nuclear power station the way they did Iraq's. Now, Obama issued a statement earlier today that was initially very worrying, and you heard it on the SRN news break before we lost our connection with GCN, where he's saying inadequate nuclear program verification, you know, if they don't have the assurances, he's willing to walk away. Obama wants this deal. He thinks it's going to be part of his legacy. But he is having to play politics with all those people who are out there saying, well, Obama's just giving the deal away to Iran. Obama's caving in. He's weak. He's not standing up to Iran. And I think this statement by him is more posturing than anything else. Because I think, along with worrying about his historical legacy, because Obamacare is not going to be it, he's looking for something good that's going to go under his name in the history books. And he knows that the next president that comes in can reverse the deal anyway. Now, as far as the P5+1 themselves and Iran, they have agreed to extend the deadline to reach a deal until July 7th. They've extended it by a week. It was supposed to expire at midnight tonight. They're saying, no, we're really close. We're going to give it another week. And meanwhile, everybody is screaming they don't want this deal to happen because they want to come up with an excuse for an invasion of Iran, to break it up into little tiny pieces that the U.S. and Israel can bully around. They want to impose private central banking on Iran, to drive those people into permanent unpayable debt. And, of course, from the U.S. point of view, they want Iran's oil to be on the world market only for the U.S. petrodollar. That's the agendas that are driving this war forward. Now, turning on back to Israel, as you're probably aware, once again, Israel has seized a humanitarian aid flotilla in international waters. It's an act of piracy under international law. And fortunately for Israel, and sadly for Gaza and the Freedom Flotilla, the seizure took place while the world was distracted with matters up in Greece. Netanyahu actually came out and said that the reason the world didn't react in outrage is they have finally come to accept that Israel has a right to prevent humanitarian aid from reaching the people of Gaza. And he's out there thanking the world for seeing the situation from Israel's point of view. That's not what happened. Nobody was surprised that Israel was going to do this. Israel announced they were going to do it. Israel always does it. It's an act of piracy. We were just occupied with looking at events in Greece and all these manufactured controversies here in the U.S. over gay marriage, colored lights on the White House, the Confederate flag, and now they're trying to fan up a new one with this decision about the Ten Commandments in front of the Oklahoma State House, which we'll be talking about a little bit later in the show. But nobody concedes that Israel has a right to do what they're doing to the people of Gaza. And what Israel did to the flotilla is an act of piracy in the Mediterranean. They did it in international waters. They weren't even close to the territorial waters of Gaza. And it's a mark of Israel's arrogance that they can do that. Now, Israel may not be off the hook for negative press about this, because one of the passengers that Israel arrested on the flotilla is the former president of Tunisia, Moncef Marzouki. And he refused to cooperate with Israel, refused to sign a statement saying, oh, we just got lost, we were on our way to Syria, we apologize, Israel's right, Gaza's wrong and everything. He refused to go along with that, and they've arrested him. And that is going to have international repercussions. From his point of view, he was abducted illegally by the Israelis under international law. He's absolutely right. Now, a lot of people are still going on and on and on about this recent United Nations Human Rights Council report on Israel and whether or not Israel really did all these bad things in Gaza or not. And, of course, Israel saying, oh, no, all those children we killed, they would have grown up to be terrorists if we didn't kill them in their cribs. And that's why we were justified. And the U.S., of course, is trying to protect Israel from the ramifications of this, especially as Palestine goes to the International Criminal Court at The Hague. But there is more to this UN Gaza report than merely the last summer's war, for lack of a better word, slaughter in Gaza. Because the UN report also looked at what's been going on over in the West Bank. The burning of the olive trees, punitive home demolitions, killing of protesters, torture of detainees, mass arrests, collective punishment. All of these are war crimes under international law. Now, I guess Israel is really feeling the pressure right now because once again, they've gone over to the United States Senate, spent a bunch of campaign donation money to get yet another letter signed by 22 United States senators. That's almost 1/4 of them, reminding Obama that he must support Israel. He must support Israel no matter what, and that he must do everything he can to prevent a Palestinian state, all in the name of bringing peace to the region. And I'm looking at these 22 senators, and I'm thinking how wonderful it is that everything is running so well in the states those senators represent that they have absolutely nothing better to do than worry about Israel or Palestine and work towards peace by blocking Palestinian statehood everywhere they can, anytime they can. And I have a message to those 22 senators, and this is a message that is carbon copied, if you're old enough to remember what that means, to the voters for those senators. If they love Israel that much, let's move them there. We need those senatorial offices to be vacated for somebody who is more concerned with America and Americans than the whims of a foreign tyrannical power. And I'll give you an example of just how silly Israel has gotten. This is a story that happened all the way back in 1987. And it was during the first Intifada. There was a town, Beit Sahur, near Bethlehem, that decided rather than go on buying dairy products from an Israeli dairy, that they were just going to set up their own in their own town. They bought 18 cows from an Israeli kibbutz, and they basically set up a local dairy farm. And everybody in the town started buying from the local dairy farm. Israel came in and confiscated the 18 dairy cows under the excuse they were a threat to Israel's national security. How 18 cows can be a threat to Israel's national security, what do they think? They're going to get a giant cow catapult and fling them over the fence against a nuclear-armed nation? And we know what was really going on. Israel wanted all of the people in the West Bank and Gaza to be economically dependent on Israeli companies, Israeli dairies. You're not allowed to produce your own food. You will be dependent on us because dependency is slavery, and we're seeing that same policy enacted here in the U.S. You will be dependent on this private central bank for your money. You will be dependent on these large corporations for your food. You will be dependent on these other large corporations for all your medications. You will be dependent on this corporation for your electricity, for your telephone, for your gas, for your internet connection, for your trash disposal. You're not allowed to be independent because we can't make money off of you or control you if you're independent. And that, by the way, is the real message of Independence Day, which we're coming up on this weekend. And I would encourage all of you to reread the Declaration of Independence from beginning to end very carefully and just think about how close we are to being back in exactly the same circumstances that the American colonies were under King George that led to that revolution. We're required to conduct all commerce with banknotes borrowed at interest from a privately owned central bank. We're required to buy all of our goods and food from favored businesses and corporations that have the stamp of approval of the U.S. government, including the imprimatur of all these agencies we're told are looking out for our welfare, but actually discriminate against competitors, business competitors, and assure us that the vaccines are safe and effective, that GMO is safe and effective. Just go on and buy this. We're back there. We're really, really back there. Dependency is slavery. That's why we call it Independence Day. We don't call it Freedom Day. Don't call it Liberty Day. We don't call it Dominion Day like the Canadians do, which they're celebrating today. We call it Independence Day because it was the day we stopped being forced to be dependent on the British East India Company, the Bank of England, the knitting mills of Manchester and Leeds. We gained the right to choose for ourselves who we will do business with and how we will conduct that business. It was one of the most important freedoms that we gained, and we've already lost those. Now, I want to do a tip of the hat to the United Church of Christ, who voted by an overwhelming 80% margin to divest from Israel's businesses in the occupied lands of Palestine. They're dropping their investment in the businesses. They're boycotting all the products made in the settlements. BDS is continuing, even though the governments that are under Israel's puppet rule are trying to find some way they can justify banning a boycott, even though in most of those nations, such as here in the United States of America, boycotts are a recognized form of peaceful, nonviolent protest protected as freedom of speech under the First Amendment. Now, the rush toward tyranny is proceeding apace. Down in Australia, they've just passed a new law that will strip the citizenship from anybody in Australia for possessing a thing connected with terrorism. That's how vague it is. They don't actually say, what is a thing connected with terrorism? Oh, it's a bomb, it's a nuclear warhead, it's anthrax. It's just anything the government says, oh, this thing is connected with terrorism, you lose your citizenship. The law also punishes whistleblowing on government wrongdoing. That's how afraid they are of their people. This whole global banker government network, this clique of money junkies and privileged people, finally stands exposed for what they really are. And that's what they really are. Think back to when you were in high school. Every high school has one. That little group, the clique, the socias, whatever they call them today, the rich kids, the good-looking kids that always seem to get away with everything because they're covering for each other and they look out for each other. Those are the ones who grow up to be politicians. So it's the same mindset, that high school clique mindset, only with the power to print money and wage war, which is what makes them dangerous. Now, Hillary Clinton is already in trouble. They're having to start giving away tickets to fill the seats in her speaking engagements. And she made a deal with the University of Missouri in Kansas City, or she almost did. The University of Missouri at Kansas City wanted Hillary Clinton to come on down and be a celebrity speaker to headline their gala luncheon, marking the opening of a Women's Hall of Fame, which ties in very strongly with Hillary's feminist aspect of her campaign. They said, come on down, you got to be the keynote speaker here. And she wanted to charge them $275,000 for a half-hour speech, and the university said, we can't do that. And so just going on name value alone, they booked a speech with Chelsea Clinton for $65,000. And I'm sorry, and we all know that Chelsea is being groomed to be the next Clinton aimed at the White House after Mommy's done with it. But it's not like Chelsea's actually done much of anything so far in life to warrant $65,000 for a speech. Basically, it's the name value. Clinton is speaking. Oh, that's Chelsea. Well, yes, but it's a Clinton. You know, don't feel cheated that it wasn't Hillary. I'll be honest, I'd rather listen to Chelsea than Hillary anyway, but that's just a personal affectation on my part. Now, we're seeing in an article over here at Investment Watch blog, the Democrats as a whole are in trouble for 2016 because of all the promises that were made by Obama and other Democrats that have turned into absolute disasters if they were even kept at all, like Obamacare. Democratic voters are discouraged. They're dispirited. They're not enthusiastic. They're probably going to sit home, according to the latest polls. They're not feeling motivated to get out there. The people who are motivated to vote next year are the ones who want to change, any change. And that's going to look really, really good for the Republicans. they're probably going to sweep both houses of Congress and the White House at this point. That's why so many of them are hopping on board for the Republican nomination. It's almost a sure thing. I mean, setting aside all the massive vote rigging that Hillary can afford to buy with all the money she's getting from the money junkies. But there's going to be a huge swing back to the Republican agenda. Not that it's an improvement. We see the seesaw going back and forth all the time. The Democrats will be better. No, they're a disaster. Let's go back to the Republicans. They'll be better. No, they're a disaster. Well, let's go back to the Democrats. They're going to be better. Voting for the lesser of two evils is still evil. And it's a stupid way to run a country. And it isn't the way this country was originally set up. This country was originally set up where anybody could form a political party that was on an equal footing with any other political party. Their strength was in the number of members of that party and their donors. And that was how the politics worked to connect the power to the ordinary people. The two-party system was invented for the convenience of the bankers. So they only had to donate to two candidates every election to bypass the will of the voters, instead of having to donate to 4 or 5. That's why the two-party system came about. And the laws were written to permanently enshrine the Democrats and the Republicans in power and to put stumbling blocks in the way of all third-party challengers. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the program, CNN is out there pounding on this issue that there's high probability of a terror attack on the coming 4th of July weekend. And we're getting this from FBI, we're getting this from the Department of Homeland Security, we're getting it from a former director of the Central Intelligence Agency. They're out there pounding on this thing as hard as they can. And they're pretty much telegraphing that somebody somewhere is thinking about a big false flag to get us all up and riled and hot and bothered to go after, whoever we're supposed to go after, the Muslims or something. Or go after the Russians, or go after the Chinese, or whoever it is they want us to fling our babies at next. Story out of the Washington Times, your daily dose of booga booga, if you will. July 4 terrorist attack on U.S. soil, a legitimate threat. And former CIA Deputy Director Michael Rivero was on CBS this morning saying, it's serious. It's that serious. Well, how can it be that serious if you don't know who it is? See, that's the logic flaw in all of this. If you actually have hard intelligence that a terror attack is being planned, please go in and stop it. Because if you don't have hard information of a terror attack, then you're just out there grandstanding for media attention or for political gain. So they're all out there wagging Islamic terror, registered trademark the White House as hard as they can. The best possible interpretation is they're trying to distract us all from the financial meltdowns in Greece, Puerto Rico, France, Detroit, so we don't rush to the bank and start pulling our money out the way the people of Greece are. The worst interpretation is that, yes, they're going to plan some kind of a big false flag attack to try and revive the spirit of war fever in the American people so that we'll fling what little tiny bit remains of our money into the war chests and fling our babies onto the designated enemy's bayonets. But if, perchance, there is some kind of a big bang over the 4th of July that is not part of the intentional fireworks show, for those places where fireworks are still allowed, that big bang will tell us all that this massive domestic spy system really doesn't work to protect us from acts of terror, does it? We should demand that NSA, CIA, FBI all be scrapped as absolutely useless waste of taxpayer money, convert the buildings into public housing for the poor, and restore the Bill of Rights in its entirety. Because it is a waste of time and money. And we already know that the NSA isn't out there looking for criminals. The cyber criminals are running rampant all over the net. Many of them probably are NSA, according to some security researchers. According to the latest leaks from WikiLeaks, NSA is conducting industrial espionage on other countries on behalf of U.S. corporations. They're stealing business secrets. They're stealing financial data. That's what they're doing. It's not about national security. It's about gaming the system to keep America rich at the expense of everybody else. Now, David Cameron is out there pointing to the recent Tunisia Beach false flag and saying that ISIS is planning terrible acts in Britain imminently. And there's a major anti-terror training exercise in London this week, just like there was during the 7/7/2 bombing. Isn't it amazing how there's always some kind of a terror drill taking place right where these terror attacks happen? There was a terror drill at the Boston Marathon bombing. There was an ongoing terror drill in New York on 9/11. There was an ongoing British terror drill in London during the subway bombing there. And the terror drills are always in the exact right location and all simulating the exact same kind of attack so that the proper resources are right there to move in quickly and look heroic at cleaning up the mess. This from the same government that couldn't get water down to New Orleans for a week after Hurricane Katrina. Now, up in New York, there's a group that, as part of their protest against the out-of-control police violence going on, is going to burn the American flag in New York City as a symbol of hate and oppression. And it's not entirely unrealistic for them to do. I mean, we're seeing this nonsense about the Confederate flag is still out there. It's a symbol of hate and oppression. And by the way, those pictures I made up of the Ku Klux Klan posing with the American flag proudly have gone viral all over the net, underscoring that it isn't just the Confederate flag that is a symbol of oppression. And again, think about all those Japanese American citizens back in 1940 who were rounded up and herded into concentration camps under the Stars and Stripes, and ask them how they feel about the American flag. And all those police departments that are out there murdering Americans, murdering innocent Americans, they all fly the American flag. They all pledge allegiance to it every single day. The American police have murdered 8 times as many innocent Americans as terrorists have since 9/11. Every year they're murdering 4 or 5 times more than the serial killers are. All under the waving Stars and Stripes. When we invaded Iraq, under the claim of nuclear weapons of mass destruction that turned out not to exist at all, it was underneath the Stars and Stripes. When we tortured those innocent Iraqis to death to find those nuclear weapons that didn't exist, just to look good, it was under the Stars and Stripes. It's not a flag that has a lot of respect and regard around the world. That makes me feel bad because I grew up in an age where we still felt pride in the Stars and Stripes. And even today, I wouldn't personally burn one, but I understand why other people would. And my concern is, 50 years from now, future generations are going to look back at the Stars and Stripes with the same gut-level revulsion with which our generation looks at the swastika. That's where we're headed right now. So let's talk about immigration, because what's going on with immigration, it's starting to backflash. This whole open borders policy, oh, it's great, we're one big planet, everybody can go everywhere. And not too surprisingly, despite all the denials, it is harming the economies of the nations that are bringing the migrants in. Britain is getting ready to build a 2-mile-long fence at the opening to the Channel Tunnel to stop migrants from boarding trains bound to Great Britain, because that's how they're sneaking through. And it's causing severe economic hardship there. Here in the United States of America, of course, the borders are wide open. The government is expecting another 127,000 illegal immigrants will make it into the United States next year. Huzzah, huzzah, huzzah. All of them using up California's water, the funds for our strained social support network, and, of course, bringing in as a gift to their new home scabies, HIV, H1N1, tuberculosis, and in at least one documented case, the plague. Now, getting on down to police abuse, which we were mentioning before. Over in Philadelphia, another video has surfaced where a phalanx of Philadelphia police officers arrest and beat up this guy who tried to evade a $2 fare. And he's holding his baby, his son, his child. And the cops just beat him up with the kid still in his arms, all over a $2 subway fare. Now, there was a time in my youth where I briefly thought about it would be cool to be a police officer. And if I'd been a police officer there, I would have said, look, here's the $2, get a ticket. But that's not what they're teaching the police officers to do today. It's to react with any breach of the rules, with extreme violence, to terrorize us all into silent, constant obedience. Now, there's a little bit of a victory that we can look at. Up in Seattle, the courts there have ruled that shouting profanity at the police is protected free speech under the First Amendment. Now, apparently, police had entered a home with a teenage boy who shouted obscenities at them. They arrested him for obstruction of justice, which is not exactly what that law is about. Obstruction of justice is when you're hiding evidence or laying false trails. That's obstruction of justice. Shouting at the police doesn't qualify, and the courts agreed. When the police kick down your door, come in, shoot your dog, wreck your furniture, soil your carpet, and you want to vent on them, that is protected free speech under the First Amendment. You have a right to tell the cops, get out of my house, you're crashing my souffle. Follow it up with a couple of choice words here. Now, there's another story over in the antimedia.org talking about a recently retired police officer. He's got his pension, he's out, he's safe, he's not working for the department anymore. Michael A. Woods, retired Baltimore police officer. And he is filling his retirement by tweeting stories about the embedded culture of oppression and corruption within the police department. Much of it coming out of his own personal experience. And says, yes, the brutality and the violence is directed against poor people and persons of color. It is institutionalized. Now, another story coming out of Baltimore. Remember when the Baltimore City Police Department was telling all these stories about the Bloods and the Crips uniting to destroy the city and its heroic police force? It turns out the Baltimore Police Public Relations Department just made that up, gave it to the news media to scare the public. You have to support the police. The Bloods and the Crips are coming to get you, and they're forming an alliance with the space aliens, and the lizard people and the mole people are all coming out of the ground. And now the city leaders are coming out and saying, look, you're not supposed to do that. As a police department, you're not supposed to just come up and make up stories to scare the public, to destabilize it all. By the way, during those Baltimore riots, there were 2 police officers who robbed a 7-Eleven store. They finally got arrested. They're both women. They're both black. And during the riots, they robbed a 7-Eleven store. And they finally got arrested for it. It's getting kind of hard to tell the difference between the good guys and the bad guys, isn't it? Because that uniform and badge and gun, that isn't it. That is not it. Now, there's another story coming out of Washington State. There was this guy named Keaton Ferris, and he got arrested for passing a bad check. Apparently, he couldn't make good on the check. He was arrested, thrown in jail for 13 days, given a total of 2 gallons of water during that time, died of dehydration and malnutrition. Now, dying by dehydration and starvation is one of the most cruel and painful deaths you can endure. And basically, the family hired a detective to find out what the heck was going on. It took 2 months to dig out the records and the information. The jail employees refused to offer medical treatment to Ferris, refused him medication for his bipolar disorder, may have actually made him better. but he was denied the minimum amount of water needed for human survival. And he died of dehydration and malnutrition. Remember all those police TV shows we watched growing up? 1 Adam 12, Dragnet, I'm old enough to remember Dragnet. And how the cops were always the good guys. Well, it's another one of those fairy tales that Hollywood just shovels at you as hard as they can. Okay, now then, another video has surfaced from Federal Heights, Colorado, where a police officer handcuffed a man to a chair and then literally tortured him for resisting arrest. And because of the video, the police officer, thankfully, was arrested and has pled guilty to attempted third-degree assault against this prisoner. Now, here is the question I have. Why is so much of this happening in these supposed organized, managed police departments? Is this how they're being taught to behave? It certainly does seem to be. There's far too much of this going on. We understand that in any police department there's going to be a bad apple who just is in there because he's the sort of person who wants to wear a uniform and a badge and have a gun and push people around. But it's just becoming way too common. And when the death rate of innocent Americans at the hands of the police is exceeding that of the serial killers and the real intentional homicides, there's a problem. There's a real problem. Now, there's an interesting little story over in The Guardian. There has been a study on death row inmates in the United States of America that has determined that at the very least, 4% of them are innocent of any wrongdoing, and they're sentenced to die in the United States. I would expect the number's going to be a lot higher, because we know our court system is filled with ambitious prosecutors who want a notch on their gun as they work for promotion or consider running for public office. I cleaned up the streets of all these criminals. And we know that innocent people do get railroaded into jail. They just let another one out here a couple of weeks ago. He's been in prison for like 30 years on death row. And they knew he was innocent. And finally they said, oh, all right, you can go home. And here's $500,000 of the taxpayers' money to make it all better, which it won't, of course. But this is why, all kidding about live crucifixion for computer criminals aside, I cannot support a death penalty. Because until we can restore life to those it is wrongfully taken from, we should never take it in the first place. We should err on the side of caution. Because our justice system is not just. The innocent are convicted. And the guilty, if they're wealthy and powerful and famous, are allowed to walk away. And that is a reality in the United States. We don't have a just justice system. And until we do, we should not allow the justice system to run rampant over all of us. Now, somebody is still trying to fan up this race issue here in the United States of America, either for political gain for next year or just keeping us divided against each other. And apparently down in Orange County, Louisiana, somebody was running around dropping leaflets for the KKK across lawns in a black neighborhood. And frankly, this reeks of COINTELPRO. Which, by the way, there has been recent evidence surfacing that the FBI had a KKK informant who was part of the conspiracy to murder Dr. Martin Luther King. And there was an exposure of a high-ranking Klansman who was a federal agent, and the FBI deliberately destroyed documents regarding his role in all that's been going on. By the way, that is the legal definition of obstruction of justice. Now, this is how the government likes to play. They want to keep us divided against each other. Back in the 1960s, when the U.S. government decided that they needed to turn blacks and whites against each other so we couldn't unite against the war in Vietnam, one of the dirty tricks they pulled was called the Black Panther Coloring Book. And this was a coloring book filled with racist drawings of blacks murdering white police officers, little kids murdering white police officers. It was all over the place. We even got one in the mail at our house in West Covina, which was as white as you could get. And I remember at the time wondering, what the heck is this? Then, of course, when the COINTELPRO scandal broke in the 1970s, it came out that the Black Panther coloring book was an FBI operation with the goal of angering whites and blacks against each other, to keep us divided, to get the white people to stop listening to the very legitimate grievances of the black community, and to keep us from uniting against the war in Vietnam. This is how the U.S. government keeps you under control. They turn us against each other, and they're playing all the cards right now. Blacks against the white, gays against the straights, religious against the non-religious, Jews against Christians, Christians against Muslims. Anything they can find to get us riled up against each other. It's the only way they can stay in power. Because the one thing this federal government in Washington, D.C. is most afraid of, more than anything else at all, is the American people waking up one morning and discovering that we are a single American people of all colors, all genders, all orientations, all faiths, or absence of faiths, and saying, you know something? The real cause of all of our suffering is not our friends and neighbors, nobody in our community. It is the Wall Street money junkies and their co-conspirators, their enablers in the federal government. That's it. And I think the people are waking up, despite these efforts to fan up racial war and tension and the rest of it. There was an interesting story over in IntelliHub. They ran a poll. Cast your vote for who you will vote for next year, 2016. And they had all the candidates there except Chris Christie's a little late getting to the gate. They also had a none of the above, which as of the last time I checked was winning 2-1 over second place, which was held by Rand Paul. None of the above was winning. And that tells you a lot about what's going on in this country. And by the way, in the blueprint for the New America, all elections will have none of the above. And if none of the above wins the election, that seat, that office stays empty for the next term in office. As a reminder to the political parties, you put up candidates that are there for the good of the people, not for the good of some corporation or some special interest group, and certainly not as puppets for a foreign government. Look how long Belgium went without a central federal government. They did great. There's going to be massive election fraud next year. There's absolutely no question about it. The Supreme Court has come out with a ruling saying that states cannot force voters to prove they are citizens of the United States of America in order to vote. In other words, they have just opened up all of the polling places to these hundreds and hundreds of thousands, potentially millions, of illegal immigrants who are all very beholden to the Democrats for opening up the borders and handing them all kinds of free things at taxpayer expense. Oh, sure, they're going to vote themselves bread and circuses, meaning the Democrats. It's amazing. You have to prove you're a citizen for so many things. You have to prove you're a citizen to get a job. Last time I taught at the University of Hawaii, I had to prove I was a citizen to be a teacher there. But you don't have to prove you're a citizen to vote. And if there's one real legitimate purpose for an election, it's that the citizens of a country have a voice in how that country is run. The citizens. Not a bunch of people who hopped over the border and are coming in to vote themselves more bread and circuses. The entire system is corrupted. And by the way, over at LiveLeak, they've got a video. They caught a man paying illegal immigrants to vote in the last California election. Now, something else we're also going to have in the blueprint for the New America is a requirement that any candidate whose campaign is caught engaging in any violation of election law is immediately disqualified from the race and banned from all future public life. Because if a candidate can't run their own campaign and keep it to the letter of the law, then by default, They're not qualified for a position of leadership in either a city, a state, or a country. We have to hold these people to a high standard before we turn over the keys to the Treasury and the buttons to the nuclear weapons to them. Now, speaking of politics and corruptions, there's a big stink growing over Lord Greville Jenner. He's a former member of Parliament, member of the House of Lords, and he has finally, after all these years, been hit with 22 charges of sexual abuse against little kids, young boys. And it almost didn't happen. Now, Jenner has a lot of very powerful friends in the British government. He's very well connected with the Israeli establishment inside the British government, I meant to say. And they were going to let him off. The Crown Prosecution Service originally stated that they were not going to bother charging this 86-year-old former member of Parliament because he was suffering from Alzheimer's. He's forgotten what he did. He's too ill to stand trial. Then, of course, he actually shows up at Parliament to file the paperwork to claim his expenses. And that triggered a huge outcry. Well, if he can fill out the paperwork to get money from the taxpayers, he's competent enough to stand trial. And finally, public pressure forced the prosecutor to say, yeah, we're going to have to go ahead with the charges. This guy spent his political career molesting little tiny boys. The clique in the government was going to let him off. Oh, feel sorry for him. He's mentally incompetent. And then he walks in to claim his expense money. It's amazing. Now, here in the United States, they're still trying to fan up some kind of a war between the gays and the non-gays, the breeders, whatever you want to call them. And even though the Supreme Court has now ruled that gay marriage is legal in all 50 states, I was hoping that was going to shut down the controversy. No, it's made it worse. There are a couple of states that are looking at legislation to simply take the state out of the marriage process and say, we're not issuing licenses anymore. Just go get married, go to your church, go to whatever. Justices of the peace can't do it anymore, and we're not part of it anymore. We're not going to collect any fees on it. The original purpose of the marriage license, which was to allow the state to decide who could and could not marry, is obsolete. They don't do that anymore. But that was the original purpose of a state-issued marriage license, to say that this person may marry this person, but we're going to forbid this marriage for, and they had various and sundry reasons. And yes, it goes back to the antebellum South and the Reconstruction. And then after that, it was blood tests for certain inherited diseases. Down in Texas, their Attorney General is now saying that state workers can still refuse marriage licenses to same-sex couples if they object to gay marriage because of their religion. Now, my solution to that is very simple. If you object to gay marriage, don't marry a gay. The problem is solved. The issue here is how much evil is committed in the world by people who seem to think that they have a divinely bestowed right to force their beliefs and opinions on everybody else, which is what the Texas Attorney General has just said, that you may impose your religious delusions on the people around you. That's a violation of the First Amendment. Government is not supposed to respect anybody's religious beliefs in the civil structure. So the Supreme Court's probably going to hear this again, and I'm certain that the Texas independence movement is going to cite this as another reason to break free from the Union. And in that context, yeah, go for it. I think it's time for a lot of states to start breaking away from Washington, D.C., because it's not working for the states or the people. It's working for the military-industrial complex. It's working for Israel. It's working for the money junkies. It's working for the medical-industrial complex. It's just a giant money-making machine sucking what's left of the wealth out of the American people and giving us nothing of any real value in exchange for it. So, yeah, I think it's time that we need a cash for clunkers program on the federal government. We take our old, inefficient, bloated government, we dump it into that little mashing thing over at the junkyard and make a crushed metal coffee table out of it, and we get a check for $15,000 with which to go out and buy a new, smaller, more efficient, cost-effective government. I think the time for that has come. Now, CNN put their foot in it one more time. They were over-covering a gay pride parade in London when they spotted a black and white flag and immediately went to headline news, ISIS flag at gay pride parade in London. Those gays, they're supporting ISIS. And it turned out that somebody had made a joke flag that was sort of kind of the ISIS design, but all of the lettering, if you will, and symbols on it were actually the outlines of favorite sex toys. And if you looked at it closely, it was very obviously not the flag of ISIS. It was somebody's idea of a joke. And CNN saw it and said, oh, it's ISIS. The gays are supporting ISIS. And here's where this whole thing breaks down. The corporate media is waving the flag of ISIS and saying, see, all Muslims are terrorists. And it makes as much sense as waving the flag of the Confederacy and saying, all Americans are racists. It isn't. It's just a piece of cloth with coloring on it. And it means different things to different people. But the one thing flags always seem to be used for is to lead a nation into wars of conquest. And that's what they're using it for here. By the way, there was a Craigslist ad asking for crisis actors for a military emergency, government emergency drill in Houston for the 4th of July. Now, given that the 4th of July is supposed to be a holiday, and it is also on a Saturday, why do they feel they need to hold this emergency drill in Houston on July 4th? When most people have got other plans, including your own employees. And by the way, since this went viral on the net, that ad has now been pulled down. It's been taken back. Ooh, we got caught out there. Story here over in Government Slaves, and we mentioned this earlier in the program. There are persistent reports from witnesses at that Tunisia beach hotel. There was at least one other gunman who was described as wearing red shorts on that beach, helping to kill people. It does look like it was another false flag to get everybody riled up against ISIS so that David Cameron can call in airstrikes on Syria and Iraq. If at first you don't succeed, lie, lie again. Now, here in the United States of America, the professional paid liars are in a bit of a panic because they're not able to lie with impunity the way they used to. Oh, it's so bad. It's an article over on Tech Dirt calling out the editor of Newsday, who is out there saying that it's time to make an exception to the First Amendment for hate speech. And they have been trying to push this agenda for quite a long time, that there should be exceptions to the First Amendment for hate speech. But then hate speech isn't clearly defined. It's whatever the person who wants to silence you says it is. Criticizing Israel for their bombing of Gaza. Oh, that's hate speech. You're only criticizing Israel because you hate the Jewish people. That's like saying you're only criticizing the Nazis because you hate Germans. It's silly, but that's what they're doing. They're trying to create this thing. Oh, if you express an opinion against somebody, oh, that's just because you hate them. Hate speech is a wonderfully fluid, manipulable tool to go on out and say, we have to shut these people off. Oh, you're criticizing human-caused global warming. You just hate Al Gore and the environmental movement. That's hate speech. Basically, what it comes down to in the present day and age, hate speech is what anybody with something to hide is calling the truth. And they're trying to look for a license to basically evade the First Amendment by saying, oh, that's hate speech. That's not going to be allowed. This Newsday editor went on to say that the American court system needs to reverse the earlier decision where website masters are not responsible if commenters post hate speech on their websites. Now, the court had said if you are doing a website or even a talk radio show and somebody gets on the phone or the comment line and starts posting hate speech, that you can be personally held criminally liable for it, even if you delete it almost immediately. Now, as somebody who's been running a website for a great many years, I do keep an eye out for that sort of stuff, because it's being planted by agent provocateurs who are trying to damage the image and reputation of what really happened. But I'm not awake 24 hours a day. And some stuff gets up there, and it will stay for a few hours until I either spot it or somebody writes in an email saying, this kook is out there, screaming about, executing all the Danish people because their pastries are making the world obese, or some such nonsense as that. And the courts had said, no, the webmasters aren't responsible. And this Newsday editor is saying, yes, get out there and make them responsible, and we need a hate crime exception to the First Amendment. And if they actually get it, anything that is not supported by the official government will be declared hate speech. That's it. That's how they're going to get around it. As if the free speech zones were not obvious enough what's going on. All righty, let's see. Another article saying exactly what I was just saying before. This is over in Global Research. Truth is a crime against the state. When you live under a government that lies to you, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. And this article is out there saying the Western prostitutes have succeeded in creating a false reality for Americans and for much of the European Union population. They're out there selling this idea. Russia invaded Ukraine. Russia's threatening to invade the Baltic states and Poland. Russia's the bad guy. And it's no more real than Saddam Hussein's nuclear weapons. And they're out there pushing it as hard as they can. I don't think they're getting as much traction as this article in Global Research seems to imply. I don't think they are. But again, we live under a governmental structure that has gotten what they want done with lies, fraud, and deceptions for so many generations, they don't know any other way to work. They have forgotten how to actually run a country the way the Founding Fathers did. They don't know what else to do but go on lying. They can't stand up and say, all right, you caught us. We were lying to you about the John F. Kennedy assassination in Oklahoma City and torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin and Spanish mine in Havana Harbor, and we lied to you about global warming. But give us another chance, and we promise we'll tell you the truth from now on. Because the government would collapse, because nobody's going to wait long enough to see if the government can earn back our trust. Much easier to hit the reset button and start all over again. Now, there's an article from Extra Public TV talking about the FISA court. Now, FISA is the Foreign Intelligence Service Act. It was the law that created the Foreign Intelligence Service Act court, which is the rubber stamp that intelligence agencies go to get court approval for surveillance operations. Now, as the name tells you, the jurisdiction of the FISA court is external to the United States of America. Because if you have a request for surveillance and you don't have evidence of wrongdoing, you can't surveil somebody just because you want to see what's there. That's a violation of the Fourth Amendment. But unfortunately, over time, the FISA court is used to justify violation of the Fourth Amendment inside the United States of America on mere suspicion that you maybe might kind of sort of somehow not be loving the U.S. government. Well, there's been a recent case where there are indications within the FISA court docket. There was a listing for a case, and the case file itself has vanished. And the ramifications of all of this is that there may be yet another bulk record collection program being operated by the United States government that we still don't know about. Whether it's run by NSA, we don't know. FBI, we don't know. Another agency nobody's ever heard of. But spying on the American people is getting to be big business. It's a growth industry. You're being spied on not just by NSA, but your local police department, FBI, CIA, NSA, they're all spying on you. What a waste of taxpayer money. Look, just do it once, share the information. That's fiscally responsible. It's not constitutional, but it's fiscally responsible. And they're still doing this, even though it has caused tremendous, tremendous harm to our economy. It is now estimated that the exposure of all these surveillance programs have cost the U.S. technology sector, the computer industry in this country, hardware, software, and services, over $35 billion. And on top of that, it has lost the American computer industry its competitive edge. Because all these other nations around the world that were perfectly content to come and buy U.S.-built computer or U.S.-designed computers, they're all built in Asia, U.S. software, avail themselves of U.S. internet services, they're all building their own now. They don't need the United States anymore. And even if the NSA spying were to stop tomorrow, they don't need to come back anymore. This NSA spying has, far from making our nation safe from terrorism, it has been a sledgehammer to the forehead of the personal computer industry that this country originally created. Here's a very interesting story. This is over at Den of Geek. And they're keeping track of what's going on over in Hollywood. There are right now 140 movie sequels in production. Can't they come up with an original idea? Well, apparently not. You're probably wondering why we're seeing yet another Jurassic Park, yet another Batman, yet another thing, yet another that. Sequel after sequel after sequel. Just like what worked before, only just a little different. And this is, to be blunt, what Hollywood gets for blacklisting the really creative people back in the 1990s for being independent thinkers. And I'm not just saying that out of my own personal experience. The same thing happened after the McCarthy era, when the blacklisting was going on in Hollywood, and the really creative people got kicked out of the industry. And for about 2 decades after that, what was coming out of Hollywood and the brand new TV industry was basically junk. J. Edgar Hoover viewed the film and television industry as obligated to be the propaganda departments of the U.S. government. And he worked very hard to make sure that that was always going to be the case. J. Edgar Hoover was instrumental in revoking the citizenship of Charlie Chaplin. Because Charlie Chaplin made movies that showed police officers and government officials as oafish buffoons, which they really are. But Hoover said, you should show them as heroic. You should show them as always in the right and to be obeyed and feared and respected. And Chaplin said, I'm not going to do that. Nobody's going to buy a ticket to see that. When Charlie Chaplin finally got his Lifetime Achievement Award from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, Congress had to pass a special bill to allow him back into the United States of America to receive his award. And by the way, one of Robert Downey Jr.'s earlier movies was about Chaplin and his life. And it's a very, very good telling. I'm sure it's out there somewhere in Hulu land, and you might want to take a look at that. They actually filmed part of that in Chaplin's house in Hollywood. It's still there today, Charlie Chaplin's house. It's being maintained as a historical site, and I actually had the privilege of visiting the house once as part of an MTV production that was taking place on the premises. And it was just sort of cool to stand there, you know, and look at this wonderful little cottage. But Hollywood has a long history of actually coming down, well, not Hollywood itself, but the governmental influence in Hollywood, whether it's the U.S. government or Israel's government, of actually coming down and crushing some of their best and most creative talents, because they're not obedient to the power structure. And that's why Hollywood has 140 sequels in production right now. They can't come up with a new original idea, or they don't dare. They don't want to dare risk the wrath of the U.S. government or the wrath of Israel. They're just going to do what worked before. Hey, this movie was popular before. We'll make a new version of it. And, you know, it is a historical reality in Hollywood that with very, very, very few exceptions, the sequels never do as well as the first ones. Now, I understand the new Jurassic World movie is a good second place after the first Jurassic Park movie. Certainly better than the second and third ones that came out. But overall, making a sequel, it's not a guaranteed moneymaker. And I'm sure that most of these films have very, very limited budgets. They're just hoping people will come in because of the name value. You know, Jason's Return to Detroit, like anybody would notice over there. Pope Francis continues to amaze and amuse me. And he was out there, first came to office, he said, money should be the servant of the people, not the other way around, which I agreed with. Now he's hopped on board the global warming agenda. He's on his way for a visit to Bolivia, and he made a request that raised a lot of eyebrows. He wants to experience chewing coca leaves, which is the natural source of cocaine. It's perfectly legal in Bolivia in its leafy form. And they're going to await the Holy Father with the sacred leaves, and I don't know, maybe he'll see God then. Weird stuff. Okay, I'm going to try and slow down. I have a lot of stuff in the list, but I was expecting phone calls and commercial breaks, and I'm going to tell you right now, I may actually run out of material, and if I do, I'm probably going to end the show, because since I'm on BAM User, I'm not really on anybody's clock, and it doesn't look like I'm going to get back my connection from GCN. I don't know what happened. If I had a commercial break, I'd be calling to say what's going on. But it had to be bad for them to just have been gone for going on 2 hours now. Now, here's a very bizarre story over at Gothamist.com. Apparently, New York City had their own gay pride parade, and it was harassed by a bunch of Mexicans. We were out there screaming about gays this, gays that. It was a huge, ugly situation. And it came out that this was a bought and paid for exercise, where there's this anti-gay Jewish group that hired these Mexican laborers to go out and protest the Pride Parade for them. In other words, they're outsourcing their bigotry. And there's a lot of that going on. There are public relations companies where all they do is guarantee a crowd to an event. Every big city has one. They draw their ranks from the wannabe actors and actresses. They'll advertise. We actually caught an ad in Billboard trying to get actors and actresses to show up to be a crowd for one of President Bush's speeches. See the president, get a box lunch, go home. It's big business, and they hire these people to fill the back stands behind these political speeches. Because unlike Ron Paul, or for that matter Bernie Sanders, they can't actually get real people to show up. Last week there was a big event for Hillary over in Virginia, and the tickets were for sale for $20 for the cheap seats and $100 for up front. And by the time the doors opened, Hillary's campaign people were out in the street giving the tickets away for free. Look, here's a free ticket. Go on in and sit down. They still had a couple of thousand seats that weren't filled. They should have gone to the rent-a-crowd business. Now, over in Taiwan, they had a gay pride parade that did not end well. As you know, the gays have this image of this rainbow color as representative of all-inclusive tolerance, which I kind of like. They even have a version of the American flag where the stripes are all the different rainbow colors, and it looks really cool. A lot of people seem to be very upset about how the White House was lit up with the rainbow colors in celebration of the Supreme Court decision. I actually kind of thought it looked nice. More interesting. So over in Taiwan, they were celebrating the gay pride parade with colored powders that they throw all over each other. This is kind of a ritual that actually comes out of India. There's a big festival there where the whole idea is you shower each other with these colored powders and everybody's in the bright color. There's only one small problem. Any material that is finely powdered enough becomes flammable. And there was a horrible accident where some of this powder hit an open flame and it just exploded. And lot of these people got seriously, seriously injured. So I'm all for celebrations, and I'm all for gay pride, but common sense. There were a lot of years where over in the American Midwest, there was a mysterious series of explosions of grain silos. And nobody knew what was going on, because if you just take grain and you try and set it on fire, nothing will happen. And for a while, there was a theory that somehow the stored grain was putting off a mysterious silo gas that was explosive. And what they finally figured out is, in the process of putting the grain in the silo and taking it out, over time, a large amount of very finely powdered grain dust will accumulate, and that is explosive. On the very first Star Trek TV series back in the 1960s, you remember the transporter effect? It was basically a lap dissolve, and they had this bright sparkly effect that was laid over them in the optical printer. And they got the bright sparkly effect by pouring very finely powdered aluminum dust next to a high-intensity light and filming it on a camera, until somebody pointed out that finely powdered aluminum will go bang. Solid metal aluminum, very hard to make it burn. Finely powdered aluminum will go bang, because the ratio of surface to air, changes when you powder something. There's a lot more contact with the air, can oxidize much more rapidly. Aluminum, of course, is one of the two components of thermite, and the reason the Hindenburg blew up was not the hydrogen, but the skin paint, because it was painted with a shiny aluminum paint because it looked hip and high-tech and cool, and it was brand new, and it was painted over a primer coat sealant for the fabric skin that was made with iron oxide. And they didn't realize that iron oxide and aluminum together will burn extremely hot. Hydrogen burns with a very deep blue flame. It's actually hard to see. What you see on that movie of the Hindenburg falling out of the sky, that bright, hugely intense burst of flame, is not the hydrogen. It's the thermite envelope that they inadvertently had. And by the way, the Hindenburg company was aware there might be a problem, and had the Hindenburg returned safely from that flight, they were going to replace the skin with something that was a little bit less flammable. But it was a cascade of problems. It was, first of all, the U.S. refusing to sell helium to Germany, which the Hindenburg was originally designed to operate on, and then coupled with the inadvertent thermite. And that's how these disasters happen. The cascade of faults that go from one to the other. Now, there's a big stink going on down in Oklahoma, because the Oklahoma Supreme Court has ruled that a large stone slab containing the Ten Commandments has to be removed from the state capitol. The court ruled that this monument indirectly benefits the Jewish and Christian faiths over all others, in violation of the state and federal constitution. They're absolutely correct. And the Bible bangers are already out there just screaming about, no, we want the Ten Commandments on our state buildings. They're not your state buildings. They're all of the people's state building, and not everybody is a Christian or Jewish. In fact, atheism is gaining ground right now in this country. Now, all of the people who have religions have got edifices and institutions they can go. Churches, synagogues, temples, mosques. The nearest bar for the atheists. And you can put whatever religious decoration you want there at all. And if you want to wear the Ten Commandments as a personal adornment, that's fine too. That's your First Amendment right. But the First Amendment to the Constitution and the state constitution of Oklahoma and most of the other states as well do not want to tangle up the civil administrative authority with religious dogma. Theocracy is a tacky no-no in this country, and it's there because the Founding Fathers mostly were descended from English subjects who had lived through the Catholic versus Protestant wars that almost tore Britain apart in the time of Elizabeth. And they didn't want that in the new United States of America. They'd already seen some of the horrible abuses of religious groups in the new United States of America. The Salem witch hangings, for example. Cotton Mather's attempt to sell the Quakers into slavery in Barbados because he didn't want them there because they wanted to live in peace with the Indians. Gosh darn it. And the Founding Fathers understood that the only way you guarantee religious liberty for all is to not have any recognized religion above any others. That was one of the revolutionary things that happened during the American Revolution, along with state-issued currency. A lot of people don't understand that the American Revolution was truly revolutionary in a lot of different contexts. The nature of banking, the nature of the relationship between religion and state. You need to go back and re-educate yourself, or educate yourself for the first time, because a lot of this isn't taught in the schools. They don't want you thinking in those terms. Now, here's another little story. This is over at newsforge.com. They've picked up where basically there's a growing call that it is time to end tax exemptions for religious institutions. And I'm in agreement that an automatic tax-exempt status is inappropriate for religions to basically have an advantage promoting their or proselytizing their mythologies onto other people. That being said, I think churches should have, tax exemption for their truly charitable works, like food programs. And I'm saying that because Claire and I support a couple of food programs locally, and they're running out of money, because everybody's running out of money. And the problem about the homeless and hungry is just getting worse. But a lot of churches are run as for-profit opportunities. Television empires, publishing, the people behind them make huge amounts of money. Look how much money Scientology makes under the guise that they're a religion and tax exempt. The Vatican owns a majority share in the Beretta Firearms Company. Why should that be tax exempt? And by the way, getting back to my thesis that banking is not a science but actually a religion, you need to remember that the Federal Reserve pays no taxes other than the real estate taxes on the property underneath their buildings. So, yeah, when you look at especially commercialized religion and how much money it makes, I think an automatic tax exemption, that's not appropriate in this media-dominated age. Maybe back in times before radio and TV and newspapers, when churches were all automatically very small little operations that were engaged with providing a center for their community, it might have been appropriate, but not with these gigantic media corporations here. Okay, let's see. I'm going to give GCN another try here, but it looks to me like they had something really, really bad happen. And, I'm not getting a response on either the Comex or the Skype. Skype shows them as on, name not resolved. Okay, that's a big, big problem. That's an internet problem at their end. Okay, so we're starting our third hour. I don't know that I'm going to go all the way through it because I'm literally running out of things to talk about. So let's talk about GMOs here. There's an article coming out of RINF.com. The headline reads appropriately, Capture, Smear, Contaminate the Politics of GMOs. Now, GMOs originally appeared to be a way for Monsanto to just make more money by having farmers buy seeds year after year after year, rather than to simply keep seeds from last season's harvest to plant this season, the heritage seeds, off of which big ag can't make any money. And the GMO was sold to the farmers on the promise that they wouldn't have to use any more pesticides, that they would produce larger crops, none of which worked out. The pests have evolved to tolerate the GMO pesticides. It's the glyphosate resistance has migrated into the weeds. So it didn't really work out. But behind that, there seems to have been a political agenda of building a monopoly on food production around the world centered on the United States of America. And just like politicians of an earlier age wanted all of the commerce on planet Earth to have to come through Wall Street or the Federal Reserve to proceed, we're looking at a political agenda to have all food production on the planet come through Monsanto and other American genetic companies before they can grow food. Because in that monopoly exerts a huge amount of political control. And by the way, there are major provisions in both the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership that protect the GMO industry, that mandate against GMO labeling. It's just a giveaway to them. And a lot of people are saying it's a corporate giveaway, and yes, it is, but it is a way of trying to bring about this global tyrannical government that supersedes national sovereignty. Article out of Investment Watch blog, government declaring war on alternative medicine. And again, this goes back to the idea that if you are feeling a little under the weather and you treat yourself with sassafras tea or chamomile or something that you're growing in your garden, you are completely useless to the New World Order because they are not making money off of you. The goal for all humans under the New World Order is you will be a profit center. Everything that you need, your water, your medicines, your food, your internet connection, the air you breathe will be commoditized and sold to you at a huge markup. Because if you are not buying products from the economy, then you're a useless eater, and we might as well just recycle your body right now. And government is declaring war on alternative medicine because people are turning to alternative medicine in the face of these skyrocketing healthcare costs. And if this provision that's in the Trans-Pacific Partnership banning generic pharmaceuticals is still there when that thing is signed, people are going to be turning away from the pharmacies. They can't afford to go there anymore. They're going to turn around. They're going to go home and they're going to start researching ways that they can heal themselves. And as I said earlier, we're already hearing complaints from small medical clinics, urgent care centers. Business is down. People don't want to go in there because the deductibles on their Obamacare compliant policies are too high. The co-pays are sky high. Most Americans who are forced to buy these health insurance policies are never going to use them because of the deductibles. And when they do use them, they're not going to be all of that much benefit because of the co-pays. So people are just saying, you know, I'm not that sick. I'm just going to stay home, take a couple of aspirin, and let it work itself out. Because usually that will happen. Your body, if your body's immune system hasn't been destroyed by various insults, your body will heal itself. It's designed to do that. One of the problems we're seeing attendant with this flood of vaccinations into our children is the body's natural immunity is compromised to make you dependent on more medication. And speaking of vaccinations, Governor Jerry Brown has gone ahead and signed Senate Bill 277, which has removed all possible reasons to not have your child vaccinated other than that you get some other doctor to sign a note saying, no, this child will react badly to this vaccine. And you're not going to get most doctors to agree to that because most of them are caught up in the belief that vaccines are wonderful and the anti-vaxxers are a bunch of tinfoil hat wearing kooks. But last time I was in California, I noticed that a lot of medical students who can't get jobs at hospitals and clinics, they're setting up private practices that do nothing but write prescriptions for medical marijuana. There's a lot of them all over Beverly Hills. And I think we're going to see a flood of newly graduated medical students with their medical license. They're going to set up a little office, and all they're going to do is they're going to write vaccine exceptions. It's going to be big, big business over there. But Jerry Brown is in bed with the pharmaceutical industry saying the science is clear. And apparently the campaign donation check cleared. The science is not clear on this by any stretch of the imagination. He's just saying that to convince you that he's right and everybody with a vaccine-damaged child, well, they beat the kid up themselves. Another story coming out of tbyil.com. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. And they're talking about the fact that the adjuvants in the vaccines are causing a lot of damage. Not just the pathogens themselves. The supposed attenuated pathogens which can return to full potency once the vaccines are administered. They're not talking about how vaccines that are injected, where they mix them together and inject them all at once, they're interacting in ways nobody's even tested for. The adjuvants are chemicals that are added to the vaccine specifically to provoke the body's immune response. They're basically irritants, is what they are, in the hope that when the immune system is provoked, it will recognize the pathogen and produce antibodies to it. But there are unexpected side effects. The epidemic of peanut anaphylaxis sweeping the country appears to be linked to the use of peanut oil as a vaccine adjuvant. Now, peanut oil is something your body is supposed to eat and digest, not inject directly into your bloodstream. Just complete nonsense. But they're talking about how there's a growing body of evidence linking autoimmune disorders to the use of these adjuvants. In other words, the more you are vaccinated with these adjuvants, the less your own body's immune system works correctly. It goes out of whack. Now, we know there are some illnesses that are caused by an immune system being driven out of balance. Arthritis, psoriasis. Those are both caused when your immune system is working too hard and starts attacking healthy tissue that you need to have. I think it's time we go back and look at the occurrence of psoriasis and plot it against the growing epidemic of vaccination in this country. They may, in fact, be causing a lot more harm. But listen, if the vaccine gave you psoriasis, not a problem. We've got this pill you can take. And it will suppress your immune system even further so that you can get rid of the psoriasis, but you might pick up cancer along the way, but that's okay because we've got this other medication over here to sell you. Now, over in New Jersey, there's been a bit of a victory. A court in New Jersey has ruled in favor of a nurse who claimed wrongful termination from her hospital for refusing a flu shot. And because she did not have a religious or medical exemption that was recognized by the hospital, she was fired. And the New Jersey court ruled the hospital's policy of allowing religious or medical exemptions to the flu shot requirement unconstitutionally discriminated against the nurse. In other words, they have just set the idea that requiring a medical exemption discriminates against people who just don't want them, and that's something that needs to be taken into the court system in California right now. If there is one inalienable fundamental right for humankind, it is that final right to decide what goes in our body or what does not. When the government presumes to decide for you what medicines you will take, what medicines you may not, what foods you will eat, what foods you may not, then the government is not treating you as a human being. They're not treating you as a citizen. They're treating you as livestock. They're treating you as property. You're being treated exactly the same way commercial farms treat cows and chickens. Fed what the owners want to feed you, given the medicines the owners want to give you. That's how they see you. Human capital. Livestock. Now, the Supreme Court has upheld lethal injections, and no, we're not talking about vaccines. The Supreme Court has ruled that a sedative called midazolam can be used for death penalties. And the reason there was an issue is that there were indications from executions that, in point of fact, this drug doesn't actually block pain and suffering from the follow-on drugs that stop your heart. But the Supreme Court said, yeah, it blocks the pain. They can't possibly know, of course. They've never experienced it. Lethal injection was supposed to be preferable to all other forms of execution because it was supposed to be humane. Now there are indications that's not true either. There have been some really badly botched executions. And again, I understand that the death penalty is something that ought to be feared if it's going to be a deterrent to crime. But again, I will not support a death penalty because of the staggering number of innocent people who are convicted and sentenced to die. And until we can restore life to those it is wrongfully taken from, we shouldn't take it in the first place. We should err on the side of caution. The reality is that the legal costs of taking somebody through the appeals process leading to a death penalty is actually far larger than simply keeping that person incarcerated in prison for the rest of their life without chance of parole. So there really isn't much of an advantage to it. It's just good for the news programs. They get ratings and viewers and all the rest of that here. Now, story out of Natural News. And this is an alarming story. Fraudulent big pharmaceutical science, and I use that word loosely, leads to 500,000 prescription psychiatric drug deaths every year. Psychiatric drugs kill an estimated 500,000 people per year. And this is looking primarily at people over age 65 who are simply being doped out of their minds to make it easy to handle them in the retirement homes. And remember, there is no science of psychiatry. There's no instrument you can strap onto somebody's forehead where there's a dial that says manic depressive or sociopathic or psychotic. It's some psychiatrist's subjective opinion that, oh, this person's suffering from a mental illness. They're too obsessed with eating healthy organic food. They're suffering from orthorexia nervosa. We need a new medication to sell them for that. In the view of a psychiatrist, almost every normal human behavior represents a mental illness for which they have a medication. Most of which don't really work because of our genetic differences. That's something the medical establishment is finally coming around to acknowledge. One size fits all doesn't really work because there are significant differences in biochemistry of human beings, controlled by our genetic inheritance. Merck Pharmaceuticals executive came out and said that their medications, if they're lucky, only work in half the patients because of those genetic differences. But it makes money. We're going to sell it to everybody. 25% of all cancers will spontaneously go away on their own from your body. The official position of the cancer industry, we don't know which ones are going to go away by themselves, so we'll just treat them all. It makes money. Story out of Investment Watch blog. Study shows that 1 in 4 cancer research papers contain faked data. Not erroneous data, faked data. Just outright made up out of thin air to sell a product. I remember a couple of months ago, National Geographic had this article on their cover about why, oh, why don't people trust science any longer? And it was a blatant piece of propaganda. They tried to tangle up concern about vaccines and medicine and global warming with people who believe the Apollo moon landings were faked and that the Earth is flat and all. They're just a bunch of kooks. Nobody should trust science anyway. Science is not supposed to be based on trust. Science is based on reproducibility of results. When somebody puts out a paper, you should be able to read that paper and replicate their experiment and come up with the exact same result. If you can't, there's a problem. But corporations and politicians who are well aware that people don't listen to their clergy anymore when the clergy says, you must do this, you must do that. They've co-opted science. Instead of priestly robes, they wrap their spokesman in a white laboratory coat. Oh, the scientist says that you should do this. Oh, well, it's science. It's not religion. It's science, so I should go along. No, you shouldn't. Scientific method is a very powerful tool for determining what's going on in the world. But individual scientists are just as prone to error, failure, or corruption as individual politicians or clergy. You shouldn't look at somebody wearing a white laboratory coat and give them any more of your trust than somebody wearing a priest's robes or a 3-piece business suit. You have to learn to trust your own instincts, your own analytical abilities, rely on your own gut to make your choices. Don't let anybody make those choices for you just because they have a white lab coat or a priest's robe or a 3-piece suit. Or for that matter, a blue uniform and a gun and a badge. Out in California, the drought has gotten so bad, neighbors are stealing water from each other. I remember when it was stealing cable from each other. But yeah, there's a lot of water theft going on. Gangs are literally stealing trucks with bottled water on it, water tank trucks. Meanwhile, of course, the bottled water companies are still sucking the water out of the aquifer, flushing 2/3 of it down the drain while they purify it to go into the supermarkets. They're still letting fresh water pour into the ocean to protect this little tiny fish that the environmentalists are in love with and seem to think is more important than human beings. And, of course, we still have this flood of illegal immigrants coming into California to suck up even more of the water there. Do you think this is a well-run country? I think it's time we have a poll on that very subject. Is the United States of America being well managed? And the answer is definitely, definitely no. Now, over at Google, there's another scandal brewing over there. Last week they were dealing with the fact that their new voice recognition system is always on and the microphone is always active, and who knows what they're doing with the information that they're getting from you. They're listening to you in the room, and you talk about a pizza, and boom, pizza ad shows up on your web page. A benign use of the technology, but it could get worse. If you're in the room and you say something that sounds like anthrax, you're going to have the FBI at your door. Well, apparently Google searches are no longer being seen as fair and objective. It's been noticed, certainly all along, paid listings appear above the non-paid listings, and Google is now giving their own services and offerings a higher priority without indicating that's what they're doing. And a new study is indicating that Google will present their own services to you ahead of other services that may actually be better. Cisco has announced their intent to acquire the Open DNS system. Now, for those of you who don't know what we're talking about, DNS stands for Domain Name System. It is a server that will take the domain name, like whatreallyhappened.com, plug, and map it onto the numerical address by which the computer can locate it on the World Wide Web, 76.blah-blah-blah.blah-blah-blah.blah-blah-blah. DNS is what does that mapping from a name that's easy to remember to a numerical entry that is probably less easy to understand. OpenDNS is one that was set up as sort of a crowdsourced system to basically make sure DNS was available to everybody without necessarily having to be a subscriber for an ISP who provides their DNS system, or to be using DNS systems that will route misspelled domains onto huge packages of advertising. There are even some DNS systems out there that you get advertising anyway. And OpenDNS was sort of a one-source solution. Cisco now wants to acquire them. And I don't think they're doing it out of a sense of charity, because Cisco is a major manufacturer of routing equipment, which is very dependent on the DNS system, and they may be making a move to somehow acquire control of domain name mapping management for commercial purposes. Meanwhile, over in Japan, they've celebrated a historic robot wedding. Boy robot marries girl robot. Or that's my assumption. It may have been a boy robot and a boy robot, but we don't know. All I do know is the wedding guests were throwing batteries at the happy couple as they went off on their Honeywell, or honeymoon here. So let's finish up the show today with human-caused global warming. There is an article in the Daily Mail. They're having to come to grips with the fact that Mother Nature just went the completely different direction than Al Gore assured us it was going to go. And they're basically saying that Europe is set to get colder. Yeah, it's going to get colder. And they're saying melting sea ice is going to weaken the Gulf Stream and cause temperatures to plummet. That's not actually a scientific principle. That's the storyline from the movie The Day After Tomorrow. And the whole conveyor belt theory behind that has already been discredited. There are not solid tubes of water flowing through the ocean. It's constantly mixing. Basically, the carbon Nazis are still looking for a way to go on screaming human-caused global warming and demand a carbon tax and that you buy carbon credits after a string of record-setting winters and another clearly on the way. Another story coming out of Iceland Review. Iceland's glaciers may expand after this last snowy winter. And they're acknowledging they had an unusually heavy snowfall last winter, 30% above average. And they're saying Iceland's glaciers are expanding. But rest assured, this is an anomaly, because we all know the world's glaciers are shrinking due to human-caused global warming. So they're out there acknowledging things like the ice caps are bigger, the world is cooler, there was more snow and more ice, and they're still trying to find some way that they can bamboozle you into thinking that, no, the world is really getting warmer. Up in Ontario, Quebec, they're forecasting cool weather for July. Unusually cool weather for the rest of the summer here. They were flat out wrong. Go back to all the dire warnings, the TV shows, National Geographic, all of them in the 1990s. They were predicting broiling weather, rising sea levels. The polar bears were going to be extinct by now. Snowfall's and ice a thing of the past. We'd have to describe to our children what it was like to live in the winter wonderland or show them pictures and videotapes. None of that happened. Even before we got into summer, the corporate media is out there saying, oh, trust us, 2015, the hottest year on record. Only on your records. They are shameless in their lies, aren't they? And you know something? Every time they lie to you this blatantly, it is a reminder that they have zero respect for you as human beings. They actually truly think you are all morons and idiots and dolts that will just believe what you are told to believe. They don't want to admit to themselves that the world has grown skeptical. The world has grown more analytical. The world is not accepting what they're told at face value. They're going out and checking for themselves. They're not accepting the fact that we all remember witnessing with our own eyes and skin several record-setting winters. We actually had a blizzard on the big island of Hawaii. Oh no, the world's getting hotter. It's getting hotter. It's all your fault. You will atone by paying a carbon tax. Now, there is an American test pilot who has gone public with his analysis of the F-35. And he basically was one of the test pilots assigned to it to evaluate it in terms of its fighting capabilities, rather than all the bells and whistles that it's lugging around. And the report was not classified. It was stamped for official use only. In other words, they didn't really want the public to get it, but the public got it anyway. And the test pilot basically came out, the F-35, and there's a documentary we put at whatreallyhappened.com, The Plane That Ate the Pentagon. It is history's most expensive single weapon system. It cost more to develop and produce this aircraft than the entire gross domestic product of Australia. And the test pilot's evaluation after simulating air combat is the F-35 is at a distinct energy disadvantage. Now that's pilot speak for it's slow. Basically, cutting through the technical jargon to the end, what this test pilot, this is a guy who knows what they're talking about, is saying it can't survive a dogfight against the contemporary Russian and Chinese aircraft. It's too heavy, it's too slow. Still can't fly in the fog, can't fly in the rain, can't fly near lightning. Software for the cannon still a couple of years away from being delivered. The helmet control targeting system for the invisible airplane and all that other technology costs $400,000 per helmet. They have to be custom built to every single pilot. That is still not working. The system that integrates the sensors in a squadron of the F-35s can't sort out what they're looking at. It's presenting multiple targets, most of which are not real. It can't bring together the image from all the cameras around the aircraft into a single unit that allows the pilot to really see clearly what's around him. The Russian and Chinese are building weapons. The U.S. military-industrial complex builds profit centers that just happen to have wings, hulls, treads, and guns. But that's not what really they're about. It's about generating profit for the military-industrial complex. When the Russians build a weapon, they want the weapon. They want it to be cost-effective because they understand that ultimately wars are won or lost based on which nation runs out of money first. Now, there's been another study that shows fluoridation in your drinking water does not prevent cavities. Topically applied fluoride, yes. The kind that they paint on and you spit out. The stuff you drink doesn't prevent cavities. Another study is showing that. Everybody's saying, why is it in the water? Believe it or not, it's been known for a long time that fluoride is a very mild tranquilizer. It makes people docile, easier to dominate. Nazi Germany put it in their citizens' tap water. Maybe that's where the U.S. government got the idea they wanted to do the same, to keep us all doped up and happy. It's like Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Everybody's on mandated drug regimes of tranquilizers and happy pills. So we don't think too clearly about what the government is doing. You know, the alphas are drug-free, except for pep pills and fun pills. They get the entertainment pills. The betas and the gammas, they're on mandated tranquilizers. Keep you focused on your work. Like they're doing to our school kids with these medications for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Basically stones them so much that they can only focus on one thing, whatever their assigned task is supposed to be. New Ebola case in Liberia. They've had one death so far. This is after the nation was declared free of the virus. I guess they were premature to say that Ebola has been conquered. And, of course, nobody wants to talk about the epidemiology of this Ebola outbreak because it always tracks back to that clinic in Kenema where they were testing a vaccine against weaponized Ebola. Another volcano in Japan has stirred to life Mount Hakone. First eruption in 800 years. The earth is beginning to rock and roll and shake and rattle and all the rest of that. There has been a large leak of helium detected from one of the major earthquake faults in Los Angeles. And that is of concern. Now, the United States, for whatever reason, has the world's majority of helium. Helium is a byproduct of radioactive decay deep in the Earth's crust. And obviously, once it leaks out of the ground, it flies up and you can't get it for balloons and whatnot. There's actually been talk about banning helium balloons because helium is now in short supply for industrial applications, and they want to conserve what they've got left. And finally, we're going to end the show about a half hour early because I've literally run out of things to talk about and nobody can call me on the phone here. There was this article over at NBC12.com talking about this woman who loses checks in the mail, and she called the NBC station saying, I'm in trouble here. She sent out a couple of letters, 3 of them to be specific, including 2 checks and a money order for bills that needed to be paid. None of the letters arrived. The creditors are calling up what's going on. She had to cancel. She had to issue new checks. She had to do stop pay on the originals, all of which costs extra money. It cost her $80 over and above what was going on. And she tracked where the letters went, and they went through this notorious postal facility in Richmond, California, which for years has a reputation for lost, missing, outright stolen mail and packages. And the post office, for some reason, either can't, won't, or isn't interested in trying to fix things there. They just let it go on. And I decided to post this story because my wife's office phone, which we bought for her about a year ago, is already starting to show the signs of planned obsolescence. It had a guarantee for 3 months. You know, you should be grateful it lasted for 14. And so I ordered her a replacement for that phone from eBay. And the postal tracking for the package stops at Richmond, California. It was supposed to have left there well over a week ago. Hasn't been seen since. Maybe it left the Richmond facility in some postal worker's trunk. But when the post office starts breaking down, when it can't work reliably anymore, you know your country is on the verge of failure. Okay, well, I've run out of talking points. I'm still not seeing anything from GCN, and so we're going to call it quits about a half hour early on the show. And we'll be back tomorrow somehow, and hopefully GCN will be back. And if not, we'll do the show on BAM User. I am planning to do the program live on Friday, even though it's technically a holiday for July 4th, just because of a concern out of something that may be happening over the weekend for a false flag. For that very same reason, the launch of the new WhatReallyHappened.com website is going to be put off until next Monday the 6th. So that if there is some kind of a false flag event, I want to be able to focus on dealing with that and not with all of the issues that are going to be accumulating around a newly launched website. But the new website is really close to being done. It's looking really good. I've shared it with a few select individuals. They say, yeah, it looks really nice. And so we're on track to get that thing out. And again, thanks to everybody who donated financial support to cover the financial dip here, because we're dumping some of our more annoying advertisers. And for those of you who were writing in with suggestions on features that you wanted on the website, things that you didn't like on the old website, which are going to be gone. And so we're trying to make this into a community that is going to serve the readership a little bit better than the last one, because I'd hate to think I went through all this work for absolutely no gain whatsoever for you, the end user. All right, so we're going to sign off now. Thank you very much for joining us today, and hopefully we'll find out what happened to GCN and be back on the air tomorrow. So aloha, America.